You're listening to the Slavic Literature Pod, your shelf help guide to all things Slavic.
I'm Matt Gerasimovich, PhD candidate at Northwestern University, studying Russian literature and film.
And I'm Cameron Lulana, a literature enthusiast and a guy working in media. We're two friends who met studying in Russia. We like talking about books so much that we made it into a podcast.
And this podcast is the podcast for people who are trying to learn more about Slavic literature, art, and culture. Every episode, we're going to be bringing you the background and analysis you'll need to know to understand these works. If
you're interested in supporting us, you can head on over to our website, slaviclitpod.com. All right, Matt, what are we getting into this week?
This week, we have one that I've been looking forward to for quite some time. We are reading the somewhat newly published collection of short stories, The Body of the Soul by Lyudmila Ulitskaya. This was so nicely sent to us by Yale University Press, so thank you for that. And I'm excited to talk about this one.
Yeah, me too. It was newly published when they sent it to us, not when we released it.
Yeah. Well, also it was published in Russian prior, like a few years prior. So it really depends how you define newly published. Newly translated, let's call it that.
There we go. I like that. But yeah, I'm excited to get into talking about this after so much heaviness through the Life and Fate series. It's good that we can turn to a book of short stories which are mostly about death.
I know, it's really, really great. Something to lighten up the mood a bit.
Right. But yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. I mean, not that death is the only theme in this book, but death is a real big theme in this book. And how it handles death was really, really interesting to me continuously. So I'm kind of excited to talk about that. We're only covering a couple short stories out of the whole collection, although we might make references to the others. So Matt, if you don't mind, just giving us a quick rundown, which are the ones we're actually covering today?
Good question, Cameron. Good question. So the short story collection, it's broken up into two parts, I guess you could call them. The first one is called Girlfriends, and the second one is the titular, The Body of the Soul. And there's one from Girlfriends we're going to cover called The Dragon and the Phoenix, and two from The Body of the Soul that we're going to cover, A Man in a Mountainous Landscape and Woof-woof. And Cameron also wanted to talk about this other shorter one called Aqua Allegoria. So we'll try our best to stick with the ones that we've set out to cover. However, no promises that we won't bleed into the other ones.
I know that's a big disappointment for all of you that we aren't going to stick strictly to 4 out of all the stories.
Yeah. People clamor for those. So
yeah, they do.
We'll do our best.
Well, okay, let's start with The Dragon and the Phoenix. This one is just a relative blockbuster to kick off the book on. This was I think you mentioned that you had to step away from the book after you read this, and I likewise had to finished it. And I went and started finished up the dishes because I just couldn't read for a little bit, just thinking about this piece. Especially in the context of yesterday, I was reading it when we were having a discussion in the Discord with people talking about what it means to have a conversation, or to not have a conversation and then have that means something that could change something in the course of your and someone else's life, but for one reason or another, that conversation never happens. Key feature, as they pointed out, of Grossman's work, but also something that really pops up here in a very interesting way.
Yeah, I thought it was worth noting that the book starts with a poem called I Need No Others in lieu of an introduction. And The Body of the Soul also starts with a poem called Not a Single Lesson Has Been Learned in lieu of an introduction. And
love that one.
Yeah, I really think that I like that the subtitle in lieu of an introduction, because it's sort of, this book is not about introductions. It's about ends. And it makes it wastes no time getting there. It kind of builds you up only to immediately get there. And I respect it on one level. And on another, I found an interview with Ulitskaya talking about writing this book and her approach to it. And because as I was reading it, my first impressions were that this felt very close to home, but I know how dangerous of a game it is to play when you're sort of ascribing different things to the author in their life, that you don't want to do that too much. So there was a quick quote that I'll kind of read, maybe that'll kind of put it into perspective a little better. Ulitskaya says, "More than once in my life, I have had to see off loved ones. Every friend's departure is a parting with part of one's own life. Sometimes it was very difficult and painful, and occasionally a miracle happened, and the departing person in the last days of his life performed a feat of courage, humility, and nobility. I myself am at an age when this point in life is approaching, but the little discovery I made is that death also belongs to life. It is the last point for which every person prepares his entire life, even if he doesn't think about it." And what I glean from this book, what I take away from this book, is something that has also just been on my mind from Life and Fate, or just from any number of things that I've been reading, which I thought was put so well here, the idea that death belongs to life, and the fullness of life encapsulates death. And in a way, this means that we are able to transcend death. And this book it's sort of, there are some moments of it where death is, I don't know if you want to say it's transcended or it is put into this perspective, which is, again, finally achieving the fullness of life, this higher level of understanding. It's almost spiritual. In some cases, for some characters, it's esoterically spiritual. For others of them, it's a little different, poses some different questions on what it means to live. And I thought that, having read this quote, I was like, okay, you know what? I think I got it. I think I got it.
Yeah, definitely.
And you don't need to read the interview to understand the book, I don't think. How it feels is how it is how I would describe it.
Yeah, especially as you read and start to see the parallels between these stories as you go forward. They aren't meant to be read, I think, necessarily in dialogue with each other, but of course, by being in one collection, they invite that, and there's no way to avoid that. So having these consistent themes where you do have not only stories of people dying, but stories of people dying in which they are an equal character to the people who survived them. Absolutely. By the fourth or fifth time that's a plot point, it certainly is kind of begging you to start thinking about how these different situations come up and resolve, and how people are reacting in each of them, and how we might, in their shoes as well. Yeah.
Most of them, if not all of them, are to me, they were very sad. So I feel like we should get on with it. We should start with The Dragon and the Phoenix.
Let's start with that one. So,
what's it about? What's the deal?
The short version is you've got these two women, Zarifa, who is sort of a high-powered international attorney, as well as Musia, whose job I don't really know. She kind of works as Musia's secretary, essentially. The more important thing about them is that they're married. These two women come from a small town in Karabakh, which is kind of half Russian, quarter Azerbaijani, quarter Armenian. Zarifa is Azerbaijani, Musia, I believe, is Armenian, and they didn't know each other when they were young. But in getting to know each other later, Musia at that time going through a very difficult divorce from a very sadistic man, they strike up what is initially a friendship, which eventually leads to Zarifa later on proposing, and the two of them get married in Amsterdam, which does not make their families very happy. In fact, Musia is so afraid of her own sexuality, that she and what it means for her family, that she barely even invites anyone from her family. Zarifa appears to have better hopes for her family, although once they find out that, as the text puts it, the bridegroom is in fact a bride, they immediately leave the wedding, and Zarifa and Musia end up having this very small wedding. But it's been many years since then, and now Zarifa is dying, and the story is dealing with Zarifa trying to deal with that fact, while also Musia is doing her own thing when trying to, in her own way, preserve Zarifa, and how that turns out.
It doesn't turn out well. I don't know if it doesn't turn out well, but it doesn't turn out physically well, I'd say.
No, it turns out as you might expect. It turns out with, of course, Zarifa, after her brother finally comes back and speaks to her, after their close friend Zhenya comes out and speaks with them, there's a moment of, they do get a sort of closure, but the illness, despite Musia's attempts to get some kind of psychic involved. She does pass, and leaving Musia to figure out. And this is one of the, when she dies, this is one of the most affecting scenes for me, because the story kind of covers, I mean, this is such an efficient story, I got to say. It's so few pages and covers such like a complete viewpoint, and not complete, I guess, such a thorough viewpoint into their lives. You get such a sense of who they are, with the, especially you got with like Musia and Zarifa. Musia never feels quite comfortable with the identity of being a lesbian, but when they go out, when they get married, they do it in a gay bar, and they get to see a crowd of people who are who understand their own identity differently to her. And this difficulty with her lasts through their marriage up until the point when Zarifa dies, and overnight Musia stays with her, and the narrator says, Musia did not weep. She stayed by Zarifa till morning, telling her something she had not managed to tell her in the 17 years of their life together. In the morning, they brought Musia home. And this is a much smaller point, and I think there's much bigger things to talk about here, especially the symbolism of the dragon and the phoenix, which of course is, I think, a narrative highlight here. But this small moment of the idea of your relationship to someone else being so characterized by kind of overcoming both like an internal sense of what you are or who you should be, and also a social sense, and finally having this moment where the dam breaks, and you can say that, and it happens here 17 years into her marriage on the day of her wife's death. That's just such a touching, there's so much to explore there in the complexity of someone's experience, in that it's beautiful and horrible and deeply affecting, that idea, just as a story point. I like that a lot, or I don't know if like's the right term, but I'm thinking about it a lot.
Well, there is a point, I think, a larger point in all of this, in the sense that this brutal honesty, or this complete and open honesty that exists after death, again, is sort of life-giving in its own way. That it gives us access to something that doesn't exist in living, but rather there's something more in death. And that is something that I think Ulitskaya is probing, right? As she's getting older herself, I'm sure, like she said, she's thinking about this. And so I don't know, you don't want to ascribe too much to it, to an author, if it's a true belief, or if it is a more of a, just said, like a desperate analysis, a hope, really, faith-based argument. I don't know. It's hard to say, but clearly in her writing, there is something more for all of the characters after death. Now, what that is, I think she doesn't, she stops short of really being able to give that to us, because we obviously can't know, but we can sort of, it's like, we can almost deduce, you can kind of infer, you can feel maybe that there is something more there. And that to me is a great effect of the book on me while reading this. And I like that this, where did it go? What was it? Oh, yes. So I like that the name of this short story comes presumably from the design on this rug that is covering the coffin at the end, and it's a dragon that is locked in combat with this phoenix. And this is just such a beautiful. This whole passage is absolutely striking, and I'm not going to read all of it just because it's very long, but it's very, very, very good. And what do I want to quote from here?
I know you could quote the whole thing. I mean, yeah, there's so much to read from it.
Okay, I'll read this just short, abbreviated section. This ring was as if a memory frozen forever in a combat from which no one could emerge victorious. The sharp points of claws and teeth were woven by the hands of the rug maker for all eternity, until the colors faded, until the wool decomposed, until time ground into dust the memory of an artist's work, of the opposing forces of nature and myth, of the enmity of weak people, the memory that lives so deeply in the consciousness of two neighboring peoples, one of which is a monstrous dragon, the other a sacred bird, or the other way around. One is a sacred dragon, the other a monstrous bird, and the memory is much deeper than in this handmade picture. It is impossible to tell who in it is the warrior, who the sorcerer, who is evil and who is good, because they are bound forever into one immobile and indissoluble ring. And this is just such a beautiful sort of metaphor for these two characters, because of course at the end of the story, Musia lets out this kind of really deep cry over the coffin, and it's said that the dragon and the phoenix were transfixed in their eternal ring, right? Kind of, these are the two. They are the dragon and the phoenix. And it's a broader commentary, right, on how, not only how myth might give meaning to our lives, but also how we may sort of participate in that, maybe unknowingly, unconsciously, but in like a positive way, I think. Not to say that our individuality doesn't matter, but rather, hey, look, there's something more, there's something bigger that we are all part of. And I think that each of these stories gives us a little piece of what that is, but you can't ever know the fullness of it without experiencing it, which is why death is life's greatest mystery.
You're right. I do think also that section is sort of an answer to a question that Zariffa herself asks earlier in the novel, which is when she's in her hospital bed, she speaks to her friend Zhenya, who's a geneticist, and she asks her, look, Zhenya, please, tell me this. Break it down, because I'm stupid. I'm not a scientist. What is the difference between, Armenians and Azerbaijanis? And her friend starts getting all these, high-minded genetic concepts. And then, Zariffa kind of says, look, I don't understand any of that. Just explain to me, why is it impossible to seat Armenians and Azerbaijanis at the same table?
That is such a funny line to me. You're on your deathbed and this is a primary concern.
Yeah, well, it makes sense because Zariffa, she's right. Azerbaijani, her wife's Armenian, and the conflict their family has around this, I think to some degree is like, are they unhappy that their daughters are not their daughters are lesbians? Are they unhappy because their daughter's marrying an Armenian / an Azerbaijani? And probably there's some equal amount of weight given to both. I'm sure that the former is a bit tougher, but the latter has more historical weight. And then when Zhenya kind of says, look, that's not really a question of genetics so much as a social question. And then she kind of Zariffa rolls her eyes and says, all right, well, tell me something else. Am I a good person? And that's such an interesting thing to divert there. And the narrator writes, Zhenya pondered for a moment. She loved Zariffa, but knew that Zariffa was a multifaceted person. Sometimes a good one, even very good. And sometimes... Oh, ho, ho, ho. And then she responds, you are a very good person, and then thinks, but there are many people in the world who wouldn't agree with that. And so I think there's two things I'm paying attention to here is one, again, we're talking about, a lot of this book also is about the relationship between peoples too. In this case, Armenians and Azerbaijani people. But you can also see it later on in the interaction. There's a short story we won't be covering, but it's about a marriage between a Russian woman, young Russian woman, and a Kurd from Iraq. And
that one was nuts.
That one is nuts. It was.
You should buy the book just for that story. Quite frankly.
Yeah, I've given away one of the secrets of the book, which is the whole time they call him the Arab, and it's not till the end where you get a little bit more of his perspective, where he comes up and is like, yeah, he also wasn't an Arab, and he was like, well, he thought explaining to them the intricacies of the differences between Arabic people and Kurdish people would be a little bit too much, so he just never bothered.
Honestly, there are a few lines in there. A lot of this is, I thought, very universal. It could have been written about anywhere. That one to me was one of those lines that was so specifically a Russian perspective that I thought that was this is really good. This is good. I could see, I could have seen this playing out while we were there still.
Right. And so I think it's interesting so much. There are features of this book which are about, other than the death, some of the main through lines are the interaction between peoples I see, but also the idea of marriage that's not traditional marriage. In this case, a marriage between two women. A lot of the rest of the book is considered later life marriage or second or third or even fourth marriages, right? And in all of them, very happy ones, or also people who never got married and seem to be doing fine as well. So I think this does feel like in a lot of ways something that's written later in life. This interest not so much in this young first love and all that, but rather in the kind of beautiful love that comes later with people trying to mix such complicated family lives and their own deeply worn preferences. But that's its own thing. I mean, here, we have this question, and because this relationship, which is so, these two people who are probably even, Musya is probably very codependent upon Zarifa, right? She doesn't even make her own decisions. She doesn't want to make her own decisions. Zarifa's got everything under control. But, it's not so the case that, Zarifa dying then leaves her out in the lurch, right? Saeed, Zarifa's, treasured older brother who broke off relations many years ago when he arrived to find out about their marriage. Now he comes back and is quite tender, although quite uncertain. He's the one who brings this old Azerbaijani rug with the dragon and the phoenix in made in the context of combat, right? This either as you said, the monstrous dragon and the sacred bird, or perhaps the sacred dragon and a monstrous bird. One presumably kind of the Azerbaijani, one the Armenians, and in the end, as you say, when Zarifa is gone, Saeed puts his arm around Musya and comforts her. And the dragon and the phoenix, as you said, were transfixed in their turtle ring. Impossible to tell what the combat is, but only that the two people were both there. And in these moments are able to look at each other person to person. And all these other things fall away from the real importance of those, ties from one person to another, regardless of everything else. And that was such a touching and beautiful piece to end on.
Yeah, and I think that this conversation, you maybe call it an interrogation, between Zhenya and Zarifa was probably the most important of the book, because she summons her specifically because she thinks of her as her smartest friend. And yet she's unable to resolve any of the questions that Zarifa has. And I think the most important one is the last one, which is, am I a good person? And this is a great example of a mirror of the almost like 2-3 paragraphs in the future between Musya confessing or saying something that she hadn't told Zarifa. And here you have kind of a live omission. And Zarifa knows it because she thanks her for coming, and she says it in a displeased and indistinct voice. And so her smartest friend, one of her very good friends, one of the few people she summons before she dies to talk with, she can't get an answer that satisfies her. It doesn't seem to yield anything. And so this is a great question for the rest of the book as we read through, and for all of the stories, which is just that, and I think the fact that she's a geneticist is the key, right? Is that sort of our modern science and thinking, it doesn't give us answers to these kinds of questions. And we can try and try and find answers to them, but we're not going to. Science isn't going to tell you if you're a good person. Science isn't going to explain really these interpersonal dynamics. It might explain some things, but it's not explaining them on the level that this book is really looking at. And I think that's an important point to make and to kind of set out. At least that was my reading of it.
Yeah, no, I think I completely agree with that reading too. And also, right, like in addition to just the idea of all the other things we're talking about, also like the relationships between people. I think we have in Life and Fate, apologies if I reference it too much, but now this is like the main literature frame of reference I have for everything else I'm reading with it so much. People have made the point rightly that we have so many people in Life and Fate who understand each other, and yet that doesn't change how they act to each other in a way, because they're so driven by their own neuroses unstoppably. But also here we have people who have a similar level of understanding of each other, and that does deeply change how they act toward each other. And I think that's an interesting feature of this tenderness of, for example, Musia, who is working with a sorceress to try to save Zarifa, from death. And she's so deep into this, she's on secret Skype calls trying to make it all happen, getting everything she needs. And at one point, the sorceress calls and tells her, look, you need to give her a Christian burial. And then this is the one point where Musia, who is so deep into this, thinks, no, I couldn't do that. She's not a Christian. Her family's Muslim. And, everything up to this point, she's followed the sorceress's instructions. And of course, there's nothing, as the text notes, she's not used to making her own decisions. And she looks out at Zarifa's funeral, gets ready for it, and makes, I think, really one of her own few decisions of this piece, and decides she decides not to do it. And the narrator says, there is no one to ask now. She mentally asked Zarifa, but her question went unanswered. She doesn't want it, Musia understood. And so in the midst of the story in which Musia has so little agency because she doesn't want it, she doesn't want to make her own decisions, one of the few decisions she does make is made because she knows her wife better than anyone else. And just a beautiful piece of tenderness in the kind of a corollary vein to how Grossman writes people. And I liked it quite a bit.
Yeah, this was a great story. It was the perfect story to set the tone for the rest of the book. And I really enjoyed it. And I read it a long time ago, so I was glad to come back to it. Yeah,
me as well. I'm glad. Great place to start off. But maybe let's move on to some of the other stories, because this one is taken a lot of it so far. But before we do, we've been here for a little while, so maybe this is a good time for us to take a break.
Yeah, we'll be back in just a second.
This episode was brought to you by you, our listeners. You can support independent podcasting by heading to our website, slaviclitpod.com. You'll get access to the notes we used to make this episode, including links to all the secondary sources that we mentioned.
If you want to support the show, but don't want to spend any of your hard-earned doubloons, you can join our email list for free at slaviclitpod.com. Or you can leave us a nice review wherever you get your podcasts.
Questions, comments, want to appear on our Office Hours podcasts? Drop us a line. You can reach our voicemail at 209-800-3944, or you can also email us a voice recording or text question at slaviclitpod@gmail.com.
All right, let's get back to dying.
Before we talk about these other two, I just want to quickly say, the in lieu of an introduction poem for the second half of the book, The Body of the Soul, I want to read one of my favorite lines, I think, from the whole book, which is a person standing kind of on a boulevard at the end of October, and the poem says, "Everything is false, askew, awry. Cretin, fool, I'm fucked. Not a single lesson has been learned. But what luck along the way? Oh, what luck." Which I just, because then it goes on to a metaphor about a poem, and at the end of the poem it asks, "There's no poet on stage, but the hall's hushed. The curtain falls, a black space. Is somebody there? Or nobody at all?" And so, just, I don't know, maybe this attitude towards life on the back end, again, not trying to ascribe it to Lyudmila Ulitskaya specifically, but an idea of someone looking out and be like, I did not learn anything, but man, my luck has made my life what it is, and apparently I'm happy for it. And everyone's watching this stage, all the world is stage, except in this case, there is no poet, but yet everyone watches it just as intently. No one here to guide the show at all.
Yeah. Oh, I just had a point and I just lost it. Just lost it.
Classic.
Oh, it's going to be good. It's going to be really good.
I believe you. Maybe if we keep talking about it, it'll come back to you how good the poem is going to be.
I have it half in my head now.
You just start talking, see how far you get.
Oh, I got it. Yeah, nailed it. Nailed it.
Nice.
So I think that one of the things that I'm getting from this introduction is just the same point that I made before, which is that a lot of the things that we learn don't matter that much. And they might have some utility and they might be useful in some aspects of our life. But again, they don't really answer these final parting questions that we have about life. And unfortunately, I'm not sure that there is much of a way to answer it. And I think that the is someone there or nobody at all kind of leaves that open for us. And it's hinted at. You can't confirm, deny, really. But I think that that's what I'm getting from the second half of this collection was a more intense look at that one particular question. I think nearly everything in here deals with that, and it bothered me after reading, I'd say.
Yeah.
Not in like a bad way, like I didn't like it, like in now I'm in my 20s and thinking about death.
Yeah. Well, that's what we do here on this podcast.
My dog's chasing squirrels in the backyard, and I'm reading Ulitskaya thinking about my own death, so...
And maybe Ulitskaya would say, join the dog. Maybe that's the point of the poem.
Maybe she would. I think she probably would.
Go bite down a squirrel outside. I think that's the message here.
You know what else I noticed, and I just wanted to point this out, stating the obvious. Like, a lot of these short stories are written for people.
Mm-hmm.
Like, a lot of them. And it is a sad thought, but it makes me think, like, some of these stories, she specifically mentioned that these were ideas that she's had for a long time, and it sort of feels like, how do I put this? Just these one, I don't know. They felt important. These are, I mean, probably for people who mean something to her if they're written for them, and it was just something I noticed going through this that I didn't necessarily expect. But probably like half of the stories in here are for someone or to the memory of someone or any number of dedications. Yeah. Including the one that we're going to talk about next.
Right. Yeah. Which will be A Man in a Mountainous Landscape, which is for Lika Nutkevich, which I wonder, on some level if this are for people lost, but also to people who who are no longer in her life for other reasons. Ulitskaya now is living in Berlin. She left Russia shortly after the invasion of Ukraine. But I was reading an article from the Financial Times which mentioned that she said it was difficult, but pointed out that one of the things is a lot of her friends had actually already left the country because they were journalists or activists or worked in nonprofits who are then designated foreign agents, as Ulitskaya herself now is. So, wondering this interconnection between not only death, but the idea of someone also exiting your life and what, reflecting on what they mean to you. Because so many of these pieces are about people who die, but in one way or another continue on life after death, don't truly die, or the death itself is unclear, as an Aqua Allegoria, for example. But anyway, Mountain in a Mountainous Landscape is a fairly straightforward story. It's about a young boy named Tolik, who then becomes the man Tolya, and his mother Valentina. And Tolya himself is a pretty middling student, but is great with photography, and he carries that interest forward into a career, even though he never does very well in school. His natural inclination towards the art, his love for it, makes him among the best, and he spends much of his 20s traveling the world, getting these perfect shots, which are then pulled away from him when he comes down with an unspecified illness, which causes him to waste away, down to the point where he, in his final days, asks his mother to dress him in a suit, and then we get this sort of maybe symbolic, I don't know how to phrase it, this as he sits in his suit, begins to look at his pictures, and the pictures come to life to such a degree that he begins to walk into the landscapes themselves, completely, apparently, with his mother coming back to see that his body is gone, leaving only the suit he was dressed in on the chair.
And this is a common theme in a few of them, which is there are no bodies left.
Right.
Which was an interesting detail.
Yeah, that's something I've been thinking about a lot. Like that idea of no bodies left, or even, in one case, one character, I think this is from Autopsy, or I don't remember the exact name of the piece, but the character is sort of an angel, right? So when he dies, he gets ejected back out into that world and still lives on. Or an earlier piece, Aqua Allegoria, where the woman becomes a butterfly and meets other people who become butterflies, leaving them behind only her clothing in her apartment. Yeah, it is an interesting feature that I'm still trying to come to terms with.
Yeah, this one made me laugh a little, not for good reason, just this story about this person who is so invested in photography and their camera and seeing everything through their lens. It really made me think of Kieślowski's Camera Buff, which can't help but make me laugh in a sort of way that only that era from that region can make you do, like just I don't know if you've seen it, but man's whole marriage falls apart once he gets a camera and is obsessed with filming everything. and more things go on than that, but that was my takeaway.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
That makes sense. Having never seen it, I'll believe your understanding.
Right. So this one, I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about the ending. I thought that was kind of the part that was the most interesting to me, and I had the most marks on that part. I really enjoyed the story. I did not annotate the story because I was reading it so quickly, because I was so invested, and I don't know how to describe this feeling other than just my gut feeling as someone who reads a lot, is this whole story is written as if the narrator is half holding their breath, like you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. I don't know how, what device, what word choice, what exactly is doing that for me, but the whole story, I was just kind of waiting for it. I don't know if you felt the same way or what your impressions were.
No, I think that, that's an interesting feature. I don't know if I was thinking about that specifically. When I was reading it, I think at this point, because this is sort of on the back end of the book, we've gone through so many other features where a character will die and then disappear, as we mentioned earlier. So I think that's kind of where my mind was concentrated, especially the idea of the landscape. I think this is something interesting, because this is, I think one thing to mention about Tolya's photography is that he's not altogether interested in humans, and rather finds more interest in shooting landscapes, places he's seen. That's what captures his attention. And we get this line from the narrator toward the end, which is as he looks into the picture and thinks about this beautiful landscape in this place, Pamir. The narrator remarks, to get there, to this white world, and to walk this turn beyond which he knew was another and then another. No, a landscape never allows humans to enter. Nature did not design it so that humans could trample on it, crush it with their feet, leaving the litter of their presence, of their impure breath. And a lot of this novel, humanity is sort of it's almost an infestation. And it's only with his death that he gets to actually enter that landscape, which finally accepts him. I don't know if I have a fully coherent thought on what this says about us, but humans throughout this piece are, and perhaps an unsurprising term to all of us, take turns between these moments of incredible care and individual meaning and action on each other, to also kind of ranging into broadly being destructive emotionally, personally, or in this case, environmentally, without too much thought about it too. So something I've been thinking about, especially within that context of death not as death. I think that makes it interesting. Something that is capturing my attention.
Yeah, and I've been sort of, I don't know, wondering on this. I think this is one of the few times where he's actually looking at the nature, his surroundings with his own eyes and not through his camera. The other one that was very notable was when he was briefly serving in the military and didn't bring his camera, or didn't have his camera at that point. And so I wonder what this sort of what this says about visual media and its effect or impact on us, if there's this reading that it's somehow limiting in certain ways, which of course, I mean, you could say that. There's not that, nobody would argue on that. There are lots and lots of books you can read if you want to argue about visual media. This, though, again, I thought that the last line, the landscape accepted him, and most strangely, there was no frame. There was no longer any need for it. It's just, like I said, this sort of boundless spilling out of life. And there's no need to capture it because there's almost like this understanding by the character that inhabits that brief moment of blossoming out, whether it's them becoming a butterfly or fully entering a landscape, whatever that means. We don't really know because we're not, dying. And I thought that was just a very, very interesting thought.
Yeah, well, I'd say that the narrator probably supports it in one brief aside, which really sticks out to me because it's so different from the tone of the rest of the piece, wherein the narrator says, "The act of taking a picture, which used to be an event in itself, had grown petty and terribly simple. The proud and high-quality photographs at the beginning of the 20th century had been replaced by dull, amateur trash produced in countless numbers." And I think in the context of this story, this is happening in this late 60s, early 70s, prior to the Soviet-Afghan war. And so one can only imagine what the narrator would say if we had a story where someone's taking iPhone photos in it. But
yeah, right.
Right.
No, I think that's a good catch. I forgot about that line. That's true.
Yeah, so maybe there's something you said for the way in which Tolya is never quite condemned for capturing it as he does, but that's not to say you can't be condemned for trying to capture it.
Yeah. No, I think that's good.
Yeah.
Some people should be.
Some people.
Ulitskaya says
if we should put a little limiter on your phone if you get more than 10 photos in a day, boy, I'm coming for you.
Mm-hmm. And something that is the same in this story as it is in the previous one, which I think is just a feature of her writing in basically all of these, but if I were to go back through and count the number of ellipses in the story, I mean, there are so many. I mean, there are so many paragraphs that end with ellipses. Almost every one in the last page of the story does. Or so much of the conversation ends in ellipses. There are so many thoughts that are broken off by ellipses. And it just goes, again, I think I'll just build on my larger point, which is that there is so much in life that we are not exposed to, that is lost, that is never recovered, that is never fully understood. And the only way that we can probably, we don't know for sure, but probably have any semblance of the fullest understanding is either in the moment of death or after death. And I think that really sucks. It's really hard to reconcile with, because a lot of these stories, this one in particular, are about people who really specialized in something and they knew a lot about something, and yet it still there is no amount of knowledge that you can amass that even scratches at that feeling of fullness. And that's what I love that kind of thought so much.
Yeah, it almost seems like, I don't know if this is intentional, but a counter towards, I think there's an attitude towards pursuing work or pursuing greatness in the sense, because then that's how you become immortal in a way. You transcend death in having a piece of art so great. Yeah. And in here,
or a podcast that's so great.
Yeah, well, I mean, it goes without saying that this will transcend death and make us immortal. For time immemorial. But for lesser people,
right us into the next one.
Right, for non-podcasters who live in a different world from the rest, who live in the mortal realm, the mastery here means nothing, right? It is not a bad thing. It could be a bad thing. I don't think in this case. For Tolya, it's not. But it is what it is. Its meaning means more to him. There's another story, which the name of which I forget, from towards the beginning. I think it's maybe it's blessed are those who, and ellipses. And we get these two sisters dealing with all the papers of their mother, who was a very accomplished academic, and with her mother's passing, her stuff becomes stuff until the very end of the story when they get to a due understanding of their mother through a poem, and then suddenly that stuff comes to life again. And so all these material elements, whether that be a photograph, whether that be a paper, loses so much meaning from one to the next if you don't seem to understand that person, I think. And totally without totally to understand what his work means to him, why Palmier is so beautiful, right? It means less to people than it does to him. And he gets kind of a beautiful ending where he gets to walk right into that meaningful place, and live it beyond his camera.
Yeah, there's a definite tension in the book between material and memory and the physical versus the immaterial. It's really quite interesting. Again, I don't have a fully cohesive thought on it, but we can. Well, I don't know. Maybe we can talk about it more in our last one, our next one, since it deals with some material, shall we say?
Death after death, life after death. I don't know how you want to phrase it.
Yeah, when you're talking about writing a comprehensive scope of someone's life, I mean, this one was great because the next story, Woof-woof, she says, all right, what if I write like 3 generations?
Right.
In like 8 pages.
Right. Here we follow the story of a little doll, of a puppy, brought to the Soviet Union by virtue of the Lend-Lease Act, which is American money lent out to various other countries. In this case, Lend-Lease used for military goods, which are mostly and puppies. Military goods and puppies, the 2 main categories, as long as they're stuffed. And this stuffed puppy is first given to a young girl, Mila, who then passes it on to her cousins, who then passes it on to Mila's daughter, and then ultimately Mila's daughter is the one who loses the dog, but gains a son around the same time, who interestingly has some of the same features as the dog, which leads her to a later revelation that, of course, the dog and her son are maybe perhaps spiritually the same being. Weird place to get in 10 pages, but I love it.
Yeah, really weird. It's great.
But great. Yeah, I don't know. Is there anywhere you want to start here? I feel like you're coming in, get some ideas.
I always have ideas.
That's true. That's
you know
true.
That.
I do know that very well.
I've had too many. I had to stop having ideas.
Matt will start
banned from having ideas.
Matt will have sent through an idea, then he'll remind himself in the chat that yes, I'm banned from having ideas.
After I suggested chapter a day, Life and Fate, I've been banned from having ideas.
At least until the end of the Life and Fate. You can have more after we're done.
Yeah. All right. Well, on this one, I thought this was such a funny way to start the story. That the idea that this stuffed animal was kind of like out of this giant military economic aid package of Lend-Lease, that the smallest thing in the world, this stuffed dog, could have such an impact on an entire family, right? And I thought it was pretty funny because there's not really a lot of just like looking through this, I don't really remember a lot of concrete historical detailization in a lot of it. There are references passing to like communal apartments and certain things where if you're familiar, this will date the stories, but in general, a lot of them felt like they could probably have happened in a lot of places at a lot of times. And this is one of the few ones that starts at the end of 1944, Lend-Lease Act. Like there's kind of a lot going on, but it sort of, again, refuses to get into the politics, which I think is kind of a feature of this. It's not really, I wouldn't say it's particularly political in many respects. Can debate whether something can truly be apolitical, but not now, I think. I think that this story and these stories are about transcending those sort of petty disputes between us, or a lot of the aspects of life that are kind of petty. And in this case, maybe finding meaning in the pettiness of passing around a stuffed animal dog between cousins who are fighting over it, between a real dog who they get, who then dies, but before he goes out from a disease that is completely preventable, I think now. I don't know, my dog gets shots for that, but takes off one of the eyes of the stuffed dog, and then it has to be sewed back on. And I mean, how old is this dog? Do I get an idea on the dog?
Let's see. It was started.
It's gonna be like 50.
Yeah, it's 60. I think it says 6 decades at some point. I don't remember where, but it was nearly 60 when the new century arrived.
Nice. It's an old dog.
It's quite an old dog.
Can't teach him new tricks. Or esoteric philosophy.
Right. Well, more important than the new tricks, it's esoteric philosophy.
Yeah. It's sort of the physical object remains the same, but what each character gets out of it is slightly different. And it morphs into different things for each of them. It takes on different names. They have different characteristics. There are lots of different things, going on with this stuffed animal. And it was really cute and really endearing. I feel like, I don't know about everybody, but I definitely had like a, stuffed animal when I was a kid that I would carry around. And, I carried this small stuffed tiger around as a kid that I got from, I don't even know where I got it from, but I carried it around by the tail so much that eventually the tail fell off, and my parents got me a new one. I don't know where they found it. Because again, I don't know where it came from. But
right.
The second one was just like, it wasn't the same,
Mm-hmm.
You never could replace it. And so this story, I don't know, this story immediately endeared itself to me because of this. And then I just thought it took such a random turn at the end, just getting into this esoteric philosophy.
Right.
On Daniil Andreev's The Rose of the World, and how Sasha gets into, a dissident literary circle with a new man, and divorces her husband, and her son has heterochromia, and so he has one color eye that's different than the other. And I guess this mimics the two different eyes of the stuffed dog. And in The Rose of the World, I looked it up. I haven't read it, I'll be honest. I skimmed this. I saw a few articles on it, and I said, do not have time to prep this tonight. And basically, right, as you kind of mentioned, it's about the way that when an object ceases to exist, if the love for it is there, then it is transformed into this new physical object. So again, it's this tension between the physical and the spiritual, I guess. And I thought this was a really good, I don't know, I thought this was a really good story. And I especially like the fact that the narrator has this self-doubt at the end, saying that the fact that the theory was not very plausible did not trouble Sasha at all. And that's where it ended on. And I sort of wonder if Ulitskaya is making fun of me and everybody that reads this, thinking that, hey, maybe there is something more. And, or is this just the author's own, or the narrator maybe, or the author, who knows, their own self-doubt? Or is, what is it? It's just it's a different tone to end the story than the other ones.
Right. I love that line, actually. I think for me, I have to say, I think it tied it all together for me, because we've been talking about this idea of material and immaterial throughout this whole piece. And what do material objects mean to people? What does someone's papers, what does someone's photographs mean to themselves? In this case, we have this 60-year-old stuffed dog, which has been destroyed and cleaned and very worn over time, and is destroyed not out of malice, not out of wanting to discard him. He's destroyed in an accident. There's an electrical fire in a shed at their dacha. It burns down. The dog Kutya is among the things they lose there. They don't even, in fact, it's something that they don't even recognize they've lost up until much later on. At some point, they realize that the dog must have been burned in the fire. It's not among the top 10 things, top 20, top 30 that they're worried about when they hear about the fire, right? And yet the spirit with I think it's Mila only who even notices it. Her daughter Sasha is less concerned with it. So but even that all being said, it's meaning what Kutya Alma, Rex, Woof-woof, this dog, what it means to everybody continues and outlives the dog itself. Just because the dog itself is gone, that does not mean what the dog meant is gone. In fact, that meaning gets transfixed into, later on, Sasha sees it in her son, and this idea of that they're all souls were created at the beginning of time, and you can know, a soul might be in an object for say, if a child loves it immensely, and obviously four children, having loved, this dog must, of course, mean that it has that soul. And then, after all that, and, Sasha comes to the conclusion that Kutya must be within her son, Andre. You get this line where it says the theory that the fact that the theory is not very plausible did not trouble Sasha at all. And I think that's not like so much as a criticism as a way that it's kind of draws your attention to. The theory doesn't matter so much. The idea of whether or not this is a plausible theory doesn't matter, because what does matter is what Kutya, the dog, means to all of them remains, and that's moved into, and then now into her son. And so the whole emotional life that this dog has outlives its material self. And so in the same way that the material self of the dog doesn't matter as much as people's feelings about it, the way people rationalize it in terms of this philosophy matters less than the fact that they have those feelings altogether. At least that's how I kind of came.
That's better than what I said, I think.
Okay, it reminds me. There's like a something that Yoko Ono tweets sometimes. I'm trying to look it up as we say this. I want to get it exactly. Imagine a chair and you burn it. When you burn the chair, you suddenly realize that the chair in your mind did not burn or disappear. And the act of what this chair is or what the dog is matters so much less than what it means to all of us. So that's all I was thinking about going through this story.
Could be. We should stop trying to theorize, maybe.
Yeah, right. Maybe the point is that we should stop overanalyzing it and just vibe in the moment.
Just enjoy stuffed animals?
Yeah.
Burning sheds?
It's okay to spend $60 on that Smashmallow. Tipsy Tolstoy Pod and Lyudmila Ulitskaya said so.
You should buy our limited edition Funko Pop.
No, not a Smashmallow. What's it? Squishmallow. Smashmallow is a vegan marshmallow brand.
Smash Mouth is the band.
We can keep going. Let's keep naming things.
Smash Burger is like a normal burger, but it's thin.
That's awesome, yeah. Smashing Pumpkins, that's a band.
Yes.
Yeah. Oof. Yeah, I'm run out. I'm fresh out.
That's all.
That's all, folks. Well, in that case, maybe let's wrap this episode up today. This is a good book. It's definitely worth picking up. It's a super quick read. No more than like 2, maybe 3 hours. And all the stories are deeply affecting.
Or if you need to put it down because you're depressed in between each story, then it could be longer.
Yeah, well, if Vasily Grossman's making you feel sad, this won't lift you up or anything. So that's a fair warning.
Right. It'll put you down, but in a different way.
We got Gross on one hand being like, isn't it horrible that life can be so horrible and then you just die? And then Lyudmila's on the other hand is like, all right, so you will die, but what if you didn't actually kind of die in another sense?
Right. Think about it.
Think about it. All right. Well, I'm gonna wrap us up here. Maybe this is a good time to wrap up. But before we do, I got to ask, what are we tackling in our next episode?
Next episode, we are continuing on with Life and Fate. We're going to be reading Chapter 51 of Book 2 through Chapter 18 of Book 3. And that'll be coming out at the end of May, just to better align with our Chapter a Day series.
Yep. I love it. And I'm sure you'll be sticking along for the ride.
To help keep our show independent and for exclusive access to notes containing all of the research that went into this episode, head on over to our website, slaviclitpod.com. Before we let you go, we want to extend a sincere thank you to all of our current supporters.
Camille, Emma, Lauren, Erica, Michelle, Juliana, Diane, Oleg, John, Timex, Melissa, Baron, Aldo, Ben, Gabe, George, Claire, Amy, Allie, Soraya, Jackson, Molly, Emma, Mike, Marianne, Mickey, Eric, Reagan, Mike, Peter, Eric, Ben, Claire, Jeff, Inez, Mai, Robert, Joseph, Daniel, Lou, Nina, Gary, Janice, Mary, Anne, Isaac, Emily, Amanda, Caitlin, Yitza, Arini, and Pack Rob. The music used in this episode was Starое Kino by Peremotka. You can find more of their stuff on Bandcamp or Spotify. The links and spelling are in the show notes.
You'll hear from us again soon.